hear from Dr. Terry Work and finally Ashley Smith, who's a graduate student working with recently. Acknowledgements up front so that I don't forget later. We want to thank HIMB and USGS for providing us facilities and support. Of course, HCRI for our funding, and NSF funded EPSCOR, which is a sequencing group that we're working with. So a quick recap, if you guys forgot, I'm sure you did. Montipora White Syndrome is a progressive tissue loss disease that we've been looking at. As you can see here, healthy tissue, recent areas of tissue loss, and this is all old dead skeleton getting overgrown by algae, and anything that pretty much settles on it. It was first noted in HCRI-funded baseline surveys in 2004. It was found in higher frequencies in Conroy Bay than any of our other sites, but I'll get into that a little bit later. These are our 4 objectives. I'm going to start out by talking about some of the distribution data that we've collected. So these are our sites. We wanted to look at a couple different distribution factors. We wanted to look at different regions. So we sampled in North, Central, and South Conroy Bay. We also wanted to look at differences between types of reefs. So we looked at patch reefs and fringing reefs in South Conroy Bay. And we sampled all these sites in both fall and spring so that we could get different seasonal data. This is what we found overall. 83% of our sites had this disease, but there's really low prevalences with 0.27% average all over the way. So what we wanted to know is there any difference regionally? The reason being, like in the North Bay, you get higher water motion. South Bay, you might get more anthropogenic stressors. So this is what we found. There are higher levels in the South Bay than Central or North Bay. And so we kind of wanted to know why. And a good place to start is host abundance. So if you have more coral, it makes sense that you have more disease. So when we looked for a relationship there, we did find a positive correlation between capitata cover and prevalence, but it's not particularly strong. There's a lot of variability. So while this trend might account for some of the distribution we're seeing, it's certainly not all, and that's something we'd like to look into in the future. When we looked at the 2 different types of reefs, we didn't find any statistical significant difference in the prevalence. The reason we wanted to look at this is just fringing reefs might get more sedimentation, more runoff, more anthropogenic stressors. It's certainly something that we can continue to look at. Finally, our seasonal differences. We went in fall when there's warmer water temperatures, and spring when there's lower water temperatures, and we didn't find any statistical significance. The immediate reasons for this could be, one, temperature might not affect the prevalence of this disease. We've seen that with other diseases in Hawaii as well as in American Samoa. It could just be that there's already there's a small range of temperatures. It goes from about 21 to 28 in Conroy Bay, and during our surveys it was 27 in the fall and 24 in the spring, so there was only a 3-degree difference. Another possibility is it's not only temperature that you see differences in, there's also differences in sedimentation. You might remember when we had all those rains, there's just a ton of sediment coming out, so that could affect the spring more than the fall. So what we'd like to do in a future grant is look more closely at individual environmental stressors, look at temperature, water motion, and sedimentation to see if they have any swing prevalence. And then we wanted to look at the rate of progression, so how much tissue is a diseased colony losing. So what we did is we tagged 59 colonies using these little tags and color cable ties. This is one of our colonies. You can see the disease started right here. We looked at these colonies monthly for a period of 1 year. This is the same colony at the beginning and the end. As you can see, it's lost the majority of its tissue. Some of our averages, we found that each diseased colony loses approximately 5% of its tissue per month. And 1/3 of our colonies have suffered over 90% tissue loss. That means 1/3 of our colonies are either dead or almost dead at this point. So we've just finished this. And we're looking at the data. Now, Dr. Terry Work is going to talk to you a little bit about histology.
It's pretty exciting because we can actually focus on one coral disease and really start getting to understand it a little bit better. So my role is to try to understand the disease at the morphologic level, because if you're going to understand any disease of any animal species, you have to be able to characterize the morphology of that disease. So what we've typically done in the past is we've done what's called pathology. Somebody's dead in a room, the CSI people come over and they try to figure out why that person died. This time we're doing something a little different. We're looking at disease progression over time. That's pathogenesis. So it's kind of analogous to the guy throwing the knife hitting this guy and seeing the whole process over time. That's very different because when you look at animal diseases, if you look at a thing at one point in time, you don't really get a whole picture of the disease because the morphology of that disease changes over time. For example, a patient with tuberculosis, when they first get infected, they won't have any lesions, but when they get advanced tuberculosis, they'll have abscesses in their lungs, abscesses in their spine like that. So that's really important to understand the whole disease development process. So what we did is we tagged about 45 colonies, and we've been following those about every 15 to 20 days. We go back, we photograph them, and then if they have active lesions, we document that. We take those lesions in special fixative, and then we look at those tissues under the microscope to characterize the morphology, both at the gross and the cellular level. And that can also sometimes give you clues as to what may be associated with these lesions. For example, in humans, you can look at tissues under the microscope. Sometimes you'll see bacteria, sometimes you'll see viruses, sometimes you'll see parasites, and that then gives you clues as to what may be to chase down for transmission studies or things like that. So this graph looks a little complicated. It's actually very simple. These are dates in the bottom, and these are basically, each row is an individual colony. A red dot means there's an active lesion. A blue dot means there's no lesions or no active lesions going on in that coral at that particular time. What I mean by active lesion is actual tissue loss revealing intact bare skeleton, which means the tissue is recently sloughed off. So basically you can think of the red dots as active process, blue dots static, nothing going on. You can see when you follow particular colonies over time, this stuff comes and goes. Okay? So you'll have colonies that'll have flare-ups and then they'll become quiescent. They'll have flare-ups, they'll become quiescent. This is very interesting. This is something we couldn't do before with our static surveys, where we just jump in the dive site, do a survey, and then leave. We weren't able to see the behavior of that disease over time. And again, this is analogous to humans. You can observe your patient over time and see how your patient is progressing or regressing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then when you look at the cellular level, it's even more cool because then you see all sorts of different things that are actually associated with these lesions.